Not every nightmare begins in the wilderness. From a grizzly storming a drive-in theater to a polar bear rampaging near an Arctic station, these terrifying encounters include a Kodiak killing a marathon runner, a Montana festival torn apart, a Russian trucker dragged into the forest, and a backyard BBQ turned chaos. In this video, we'll uncover 6 shocking bear attacks proving danger can strike anywhere. On August 18, 2025, a warm summer evening settled over a small-town drive-in theater. Families filled the lot with SUVs, trucks, and minivans, excited for a movie under the stars. Among them, David Miller, his wife Karen, and their 2 children, Liam and Sophie, parked their dark SUV in the middle row. They spread blankets, unwrapped snacks, and waited as the glow of the giant screen lit up the night. The air carried the smell of buttered popcorn, candy, and grilled food from nearby vendors, blending into a sweet haze that hung low in the stillness. The Millers, like many others, came to enjoy a quiet night together. David leaned back in the driver's seat while Karen organized snacks for the children. Both Liam and Sophie pressed close to the windows, pointing at the glowing screen. The sounds of laughter, music from car radios, and the faint echo of the movie created a sense of comfort that felt far removed from danger. None of them noticed the shadows shifting at the tree line, where something far larger than any expected guest stirred in silence. Without warning, the calm shattered. A massive grizzly charged out of the forest, its heavy paws pounding against the dirt, the ground vibrating under its weight. Screams rippled across the lot as headlights flicked on and horns blared. The predator surged between parked cars, its hulking body brushing mirrors and scratching doors as it barreled forward. Panic spread instantly, parents pulling children inside vehicles, engines roaring to life in a desperate scramble to escape. The grizzly slammed against the Miller's SUV, rocking it hard enough to send snacks and blankets flying. Inside, chaos erupted. David tried to shield his family, raising his arm as the animal's paw crashed through the side, claws tearing across his shoulder and chest. Pain jolted through his body as he was thrown sideways against the door, the impact leaving him dazed and bleeding. Karen pulled Liam and Sophie close, her body shielding theirs as the bear clawed and snarled, its breath fogging the glass. Around them, other moviegoers reacted with noise and movement, banging on their car roofs, shouting, and flashing headlights in every direction. The sudden commotion distracted the grizzly, drawing its attention away from the Millers just long enough for David to push himself upright. With his body aching and his vision blurred, he managed to roll the SUV forward, tires squealing against the gravel as he pulled away from the immediate threat. The grizzly reared back, striking at the air before circling the vehicles, growling in frustration. For several long minutes, the theater was gripped by chaos. Engines revved, horns blasted, and frightened voices cut through the night, all blending into a desperate attempt to drive the predator back. Finally, the bear turned away, retreating into the forest, leaving behind a scene of terror, shattered glass, and shattered families. The drive-in theater fell into a heavy silence after the grizzly disappeared into the dark forest. Engines idled, headlights still flashed, and voices trembled as families tried to process what had just unfolded. The Miller's SUV rolled to a stop near the edge of the lot, its sides scratched and bent, windows fogged with fear and panic. David leaned heavily against the steering wheel, blood staining his shirt from deep cuts along his shoulder and chest. His breathing was uneven, but he forced himself to remain steady for the sake of his family. Karen kept both children close, her arms trembling as she tried to calm them. Liam and Sophie were wide-eyed, silent, and shaking, their blankets lying crumpled at their feet. Around them, other families emerged slowly from their vehicles, some crying, some clutching their phones, while others simply stood frozen in disbelief. The smell of spilled popcorn and soda lingered in the night air, mingling with the sharp scent of torn metal. Rangers and local responders arrived minutes later, headlights sweeping the lot as they guided people back into safety. The theater lot, once a place of laughter and joy, had become a scene marked by fear and injury. Paramedics moved quickly to David, easing him from the driver's seat. His shirt was cut away to expose the gashes running across his chest and arm. He winced as bandages pressed against the wounds, but he remained conscious, his eyes fixed on his family to reassure them. Karen walked with Liam and Sophie to a waiting vehicle, their small hands gripping hers tightly, unwilling to let go. The children whispered questions, but their mother kept her focus forward, determined to keep them steady as flashing lights filled the scene. Authorities spread through the lot, warning others to stay inside vehicles until the area was secured. Search teams with spotlights and rifles scanned the tree line, prepared for the possibility that the bear might return. People huddled inside cars, whispering and waiting, the movie screen still glowing faintly in the background as though nothing had happened. That strange contrast of normalcy and terror left many shaken, realizing how quickly safety could be taken away. By the time the Millers were transported to a nearby hospital, the chaos had begun to settle. Doctors treated David's injuries, stitching torn flesh and bandaging bruises. Though the wounds were painful, they were not life-threatening, and relief spread through the family as news of his survival became clear. Karen sat with Liam and Sophie in the waiting room, their faces pale but their eyes fixed on the door, waiting for word. Hours later, they were reunited, grateful but still overwhelmed by what they had endured. In the following days, the story spread quickly across the region. The image of a massive grizzly storming a drive-in theater shocked communities, sparking conversations about human gatherings in proximity to wilderness areas. Officials explained that a poor season for natural food sources may have prompted the bear to move closer to town, its hunger overriding its fear of people. Residents who once viewed bears as distant symbols of the wild were forced to face the reality that danger could appear even in familiar places. For the Millers, the night became a lasting reminder of fragility. Their SUV bore scars of claws. Their memories carried the sound of shattering glass and panicked screams, and their children learned that even a place meant for family fun could turn into a struggle for survival. Though they healed with time, the family never forgot the night when the glowing screen above them contrasted with the raw power of nature just steps away. On July 7, 2021, the rising sun cast a pale glow across the rugged trails of Kodiak Island, Alaska. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet moss and pine as a small group of marathon runners pushed themselves along the twisting path. Among them was Ryan Caldwell, a 29-year-old athlete known for his speed and stamina. He led the pack with strong strides, his shoes pounding rhythmically against the dirt. Behind him, Marcus Lane, 31, and a few others kept pace, their breaths visible in the cool dawn air. The trail wound through dense forest, with towering evergreens lining the path, and narrow clearings breaking into views of misty ridges. For the runners, it was both a challenge and a reward, testing endurance while offering the beauty of Alaska's wilderness. But the same wildness that inspired them also carried danger. Few noticed the shifting shadows near the tree line, where a massive predator waited unseen. Without warning, the calm morning shattered. A massive Kodiak bear burst from the thick brush, its roar echoing through the forest. The ground seemed to tremble under its charge as it closed the distance with terrifying speed. Panic swept through the runners, their steady rhythm replaced by scattered screams and frantic movement. Some bolted back down the trail, others froze in shock. Ryan at the front tried to cut into the trees, his body twisting mid-stride in a desperate attempt to escape. The predator reached him in seconds. With one brutal swipe, the bear sent him crashing to the ground, his body striking the dirt with bone-jarring force. Claws dug into his shoulder, and sharp teeth tore into his chest, blood staining the earth beneath him. Ryan struggled, his arms pushing against the massive weight, his cries carrying through the trees. Marcus, just behind, saw the horrifying scene unfold. Helpless yet desperate, he hurled his water bottle at the animal, the plastic bouncing harmlessly off its thick hide. The bear snarled, ripping at Ryan's backpack, scattering energy gels, clothes, and gear across the trail. The other runners stood frozen at a distance, their faces pale, unable to do anything as the chaos unfolded before them. The attack lasted only moments, but it felt like an eternity. The predator's strength was overwhelming, each movement showing its sheer dominance. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the bear pulled back, retreating into the dense forest, leaving behind silence broken only by heavy breathing and the rustle of branches. Ryan lay motionless, his body marked by deep wounds, his shirt torn to shreds. Marcus ran forward, kneeling beside him with shaking hands, his mind racing for help that seemed impossibly far away. The trail, once filled with determination and focus, had become a place of tragedy in the span of a single minute. The wilderness that surrounded them no longer felt peaceful, but instead alive with the unseen threat that had just struck with merciless speed. The forest was still heavy with silence after the bear vanished into the thick brush. The runners stood frozen, their hearts pounding, their minds struggling to process the horror they had just witnessed. Marcus knelt beside Ryan, his hands trembling as he pressed against the torn fabric. But the injuries were far too severe. The deep gashes across the chest and shoulder left little chance of survival. Blood seeped into the trail dust, and the quiet stillness of the dawn became a haunting reminder of how quickly strength and life could be taken away. Some of the group ran back down the trail in search of help, their footsteps echoing through the trees as they shouted for anyone nearby. Others remained rooted in place, too shaken to move, their eyes darting nervously toward the tree line, expecting the bear to return. The air felt colder now. The once inspiring wilderness transformed into a place of dread. The sound of crows in the distance only added to the eerie weight pressing down on the survivors. By the time the first rescue team arrived, the scene carried the marks of tragedy. Supplies from Ryan's backpack were scattered across the ground, torn open and mixed with dirt. Shoe prints from frightened runners cut through the soil, overlapping with deep paw marks that led back into the forest. Paramedics rushed forward, but they could only confirm what Marcus already knew. Ryan was gone. His body, once strong and full of energy, lay still and lifeless beneath the towering pines. The group was escorted back to the trailhead, their faces pale, clothes streaked with sweat and dirt, and minds heavy with shock. Marcus walked silently, his thoughts replaying the attack over and over. Every sound and movement burned into his memory. The other runners struggled with their own emotions, torn between grief, fear, and disbelief that such a powerful predator could appear without warning in a place they had thought safe. News of the incident spread quickly across the island, sending waves of unease through the community. Many who often ran or hiked in the wilderness began questioning the risks, wondering if the trails they loved could ever feel safe again. Authorities stepped in to remind residents and visitors that Kodiak bears, especially when food conditioned, pose a danger when drawn to human scent. Officials emphasized the importance of traveling in larger groups, carrying deterrents, and recognizing that even the strongest and fittest individuals are not immune to such predators. Ryan's death became a stark reminder of the thin line between adventure and danger in wild country. Memorials were held in his honor, his family and friends remembering his determination, his passion for running, and his love for the outdoors. Marcus, though physically unharmed, carried the scars of the morning within him. He had witnessed not only the attack, but also the fragility of life in its rawest form. For those who remained, the wilderness of Kodiak Island no longer felt like just a place of beauty and endurance. It became a symbol of respect, warning that nature's power is unforgiving, and that moments of peace can turn into tragedy in the blink of an eye. On August 12, 2019, the sound of laughter and music filled a wide clearing in Montana as families gathered for a summer celebration. Bright banners waved above food stands, smoke from grills drifted through the air, and children darted between tents with sticky hands from sweet treats. At the center of the crowd stood Laura McKinney, a 34-year-old mother holding cotton candy as her 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, tugged eagerly at her arm. The two blended into a sea of families, unaware that the joy of the day was about to turn into terror. The festival had been planned for weeks, with farmers setting up pens for livestock, vendors cooking roasted meat, and entertainers drawing large crowds. The smells carried far into the surrounding forest, a place where danger always seemed to linger. Hidden beyond the trees, a massive grizzly had picked up the scent, its hunger growing as it followed the trail toward the noise and food. What had started as a peaceful gathering was about to become a frantic fight for survival. The first sign of trouble came as the predator burst through the tree line. Its enormous frame moved with shocking speed, sending people stumbling backward in disbelief. In seconds, the bear smashed through a wooden barrier near the food stalls, splintering it like kindling. Tables collapsed, chairs toppled, and screams filled the air as the celebration turned into chaos. Laura and Sophie were caught in the center of the panic. As they turned to run, the beast lunged. With brutal force, it knocked Laura to the ground, its jaws clamping into her shoulder. She cried out in pain, her body pinned as the cotton candy spun from her grasp. Sophie froze beside her, her wide eyes locked on the terrifying scene. Guests scattered in every direction, some diving behind tents, while others grabbed children and sprinted toward the parking lot. The bear roared, swiping at benches, flipping them aside as if they were twigs. Vendor stalls were torn open, food and supplies spilling into the dirt as canvas shredded under the predator's claws. The once vibrant festival grounds were reduced to wreckage in an instant. A nearby police officer drew his weapon, firing warning shots into the air. The noise cut through the chaos, startling the bear but not enough to drive it away. Staff members rushed forward in trucks and utility vehicles, honking horns and revving engines as they tried to create barriers between the families and the beast. Dust rose as tires spun, people shouting frantically as they worked to push the animal back. Laura fought to move, blood streaking her arm as Sophie clutched at her side, desperate to pull her free. For tense minutes, the predator paced among the wreckage, tearing at scraps of food while glaring at the crowd. Finally, faced with the loud engines and flashing lights, it turned toward the forest. With one last roar, the grizzly retreated into the trees, leaving behind broken tents, crushed tables, and a field full of terrified people. Laura and Sophie were rushed to safety, their injuries serious, but not fatal. Yet the shadow of that moment lingered across the festival grounds, a brutal reminder that even joy can be shattered in seconds when the wild intrudes. The festival grounds lay in silence after the giant grizzly disappeared back into the forest. Families stood in shock, many holding their children tightly, while others stared at the broken remains of stalls and tables. The smell of roasted meat still lingered in the air, mixing with dust, spilled drinks, and torn canvas. It was hard to believe that only minutes earlier, the same clearing had been full of laughter and celebration. Now it felt like the ruins of a battlefield. Laura was lifted onto a stretcher by paramedics who had rushed through the crowd. Blood soaked through her shirt from the deep wounds in her shoulder, and her face was pale with pain and shock. Sophie walked beside her, clutching a blanket someone had given her, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Volunteers cleared a path as the mother and daughter were taken to an ambulance. Parents whispered to one another, thankful their own families were safe, while at the same time shaken by how close they had come to tragedy. The once lively festival had ended abruptly. Vendors abandoned their stalls. Food lay scattered across the ground, and livestock pens stood empty after handlers rushed animals away. Some guests gathered belongings left behind in the panic, while others simply left, unwilling to remain in a place that now felt unsafe. The police marked the trampled ground, noting claw marks and broken wood where the bear had stormed through. Officials quickly cordoned off the site. Wildlife specialists explained to the shaken crowd that the smell of cooked food, combined with the presence of penned livestock, had likely drawn the grizzly into the area. They stressed that the attack was a rare but dangerous reminder of how unpredictable wild animals can be, especially when hunger drives them toward human gatherings. At the hospital, doctors worked for hours to clean and stitch Laura's wounds. More than 60 stitches were required to close the damage along her shoulder and back. Despite the pain, she survived, though recovery would take weeks of rest and care. Sophie remained close to her side, traumatized but physically unharmed. Their bond grew stronger through the ordeal, but the memory of that night would stay with them both forever. In the following days, the story spread across Montana and beyond. News outlets replayed images of overturned tents, shattered benches, and frightened families fleeing through the dust. For many, it was a wake-up call about the risks of holding open-air events in such proximity to dense wilderness. Festival organizers promised stricter safety measures in the future, including stronger barriers, food storage protocols, and more visible security. For Laura and Sophie, the summer festival that should have been a simple evening of joy had become a moment of terror they would never forget. The scars on Laura's body would remain as a lasting reminder of how close they had come to disaster. Yet their survival offered hope to others, showing that even in moments of fear, quick action and community support could save lives. The forest surrounding the town seemed different after that day. Every sound in the night, every shadow at the tree line, reminded people of the power that lurked just beyond their streets. The celebration had ended, but the lesson it left behind would stay for years. On May 18, 2025, The steady rumble of trucks echoed along a narrow logging road deep in Russia's Amur region. The area was renowned for its dense forests, rugged terrain, and constant threat from predators that roamed the wilderness. Dmitry Sokolov, a 45-year-old driver, was unloading heavy crates stacked with supplies. The cargo contained food items, including meat and fish, packed tightly in wooden boxes. For him, this was routine work, part of his daily route through remote stretches where few people lived. What he did not know was that the smell of the cargo had already drawn the attention of one of the forest's most feared hunters. The morning was quiet except for the sound of shifting crates and the occasional call of birds overhead. But hidden in the undergrowth, a massive Russian grizzly was moving closer, its nose twitching at the strong scent. The bear was large, powerful, and desperately hungry. In seconds, the calm work site was turned into a scene of violence. With no warning, the Russian grizzly burst from the brush, crashing through branches and scattering dust and leaves. Dmitry looked up just as the enormous predator closed the distance between them. He tried to retreat toward the cab of the truck, but the animal was too fast. In moments, the beast slammed into him with crushing weight, forcing him to the ground. The impact knocked the breath from his chest, and wooden crates toppled all around as the supplies spilled across the road. The bear's jaws clamped down, tearing into his chest and shoulder. Dmitry struggled desperately, kicking and clawing at the dirt. But the predator's strength was overwhelming. Cries rang out from co-workers further down the road. They waved their arms and shouted, but the distance was too great. None could reach him in time. The forest filled with the sounds of snarls, crashing wood, and the panicked shouts of men who could do nothing but watch. The Russian grizzly dragged Dmitry through scattered cargo, his jacket ripped apart, blood streaking the dirt beneath him. Supplies, once stacked neatly, were now broken, trampled, and useless. The scene became one of chaos and destruction, a sudden eruption of primal force against fragile human effort. The men nearby tried everything to distract the predator, but their shouts only echoed through the trees. The bear pulled its victim toward the roadside brush, its strength making every attempt to intervene impossible. Crates lay smashed, metal bindings twisted, and the once orderly worksite was left in ruin. Moments stretched into what felt like hours before the bear finally retreated, fading back into the dark line of trees. Silence fell once again, broken only by the ragged breathing of the stunned workers. They rushed forward, but it was already too late. By the time rescuers arrived, there was nothing left to be done. The road that morning had begun as an ordinary stop for unloading supplies, but it ended as a place of tragedy. Dmitry's final moments showed the raw, unstoppable danger that lurked in the wild edges of the Amur region, where even a simple task could end in disaster when a predator appeared without warning. The quiet that returned to the roadside after the giant predator vanished felt heavier than the crash of its attack. The scattered supplies lay broken across the dirt, the crates split open, and the metal bindings twisted like thin wire. Workers stood frozen, their faces pale as they stared at the destruction around them. The deep gouges in the soil and the blood left behind were grim reminders of how quickly the forest had taken one of their own. What had begun as a routine delivery ended in devastation none of them would ever forget. Authorities were contacted immediately, and word spread through the nearby settlements with shocking speed. By the time investigators arrived, the once orderly site was unrecognizable. They marked the claw marks across the truck's side, the shattered wood that had been ripped apart in the frenzy, and the torn fabric scattered near the brush. For the officials, it was clear that the predator had been conditioned to associate human presence with food. The smell of the stored meat and fish was too strong to resist, and once the beast committed to the attack, there had been no chance for escape. The loss of Dmitry struck deeply at those who worked beside him. Many remembered him as a dependable driver who had traveled these roads for years without fear of danger. His family received the news with shock, mourning not only the man they loved, but also the brutal way in which his life had been taken. For his co-workers, the memory of standing helplessly only meters away would remain etched in their minds. They had seen how powerless even strong men became in the face of such sudden violence. In the days that followed, the road remained closed. Broken crates were cleared, and investigators studied the site for signs of the Russian grizzly's path. Reports were issued warning workers that the forests of the Amur region had become more dangerous with each passing year. As food sources in the wild grew scarce, Animals wandered closer to human activity, increasing the likelihood of deadly encounters. Officials emphasized that strict measures must be taken to secure all cargo, especially when it includes strong-smelling goods like fish or meat. Hunters and rangers patrolled the area, but the vastness of the forest made their task nearly impossible. Few believed the bear would remain nearby, yet the fear of its return lingered in every conversation. The community around the logging camps grew tense, with many refusing to work without additional protection. Radios buzzed with warnings, and safety briefings became a daily routine. For the family left behind, the aftermath was one of grief and quiet resilience. Dimitri's absence was felt not only at home, but also across the tight-knit circles of workers who knew him well. His story was repeated as both a caution and a tribute, a reminder of the risks faced by those who lived and worked on the edge of the wilderness. The road where the tragedy occurred became a symbol of the thin line between human effort and the raw power of nature. The shattered crates and clawed earth were cleaned away, but the memory remained, an unshakable lesson that in the Amur forests, even the most ordinary task could turn fatal in a heartbeat. On August 24, 2025, laughter and music filled a quiet backyard as friends gathered for a summer barbecue. The air was heavy with the smell of grilled meat, fresh corn, and roasted vegetables. Folding chairs circled a large table. Coolers sat packed with drinks, and a fire crackled low in the corner of the yard. Jenna Collins, 32, moved between the table and grill with a tray piled high with food, smiling as she helped serve guests. Her brother, Mark Collins, 35, stood nearby, chatting with friends and keeping an eye on the children playing at the edge of the grass. Behind the cheerful scene, a dark figure moved through the tree line, a large black bear, driven by hunger and the powerful scent drifting through the air, crept closer. For hours, it had likely wandered along the forest edge, its nose drawn to the irresistible mix of scents. With the group focused on food and laughter, no one noticed the danger drawing near until it was too late. In an instant, the predator burst from the cover of trees. Branches snapped as the enormous animal lunged forward, sending birds scattering into the sky. Guests froze, screams ripping through the air as the bear barreled straight into the center of the gathering. Plates clattered to the ground, drinks spilled, and chairs toppled in every direction. Jenna had no time to react. The tray flew from her hands as the beast slammed into her, knocking her down hard onto the grass. Sharp claws raked across her shoulders and arms, leaving deep bleeding wounds. She gasped in pain, trying to push herself away as the massive body loomed over her. Friends shouted and scattered, some diving behind coolers and others rushing toward the house. Mark, seeing his sister on the ground, grabbed the first object within reach, a heavy broom leaning against the deck. He charged forward, swinging wildly to draw the predator's attention. The bear swiped back, its claws tearing into his leg and leaving a deep gash that sent him staggering. For a tense moment, the crowd was trapped in chaos, torn between flight and the desperate urge to help. The animal lunged through the scattered group, knocking over a cooler and sending bottles clinking across the yard. Smoke from the grill mixed with the smell of food and fear, fueling the frenzy. People scrambled to climb fences, slam doors shut, or hide behind overturned tables. The sound of shouting and clanging objects filled the air as terrified guests did anything to keep the beast from charging again. Finally, after long, agonizing minutes, the predator paused. Its head swung back toward the forest, ears twitching at the noise of banging pots and shouts from those still fighting to drive it away. With a sudden pivot, it turned and retreated into the tree line, crashing back into the woods from where it had come. The backyard was left in ruins. Food lay scattered in the dirt. Chairs lay crushed beneath claw marks, and the smell of smoke clung heavily in the air. Jenna bled heavily from her wounds, while Mark limped, clutching his injured leg. The once cheerful gathering had turned into a nightmarish scene none would ever forget. The backyard fell into silence after the black bear disappeared into the forest, leaving behind a trail of overturned chairs, scattered food, and broken coolers. The smell of charred meat still lingered in the air, but the laughter that had filled the evening was gone. Instead, frightened whispers and the sound of quick footsteps filled the space as neighbors rushed to lend a hand. Jenna lay on the grass, blood soaking through her sleeves where claws had torn into her skin. Mark sat against the side of the deck, gripping his injured leg as others tore strips of cloth to press against his wound. Children who had once been playing nearby were now huddled inside the house, trembling and wide-eyed, while adults scrambled to keep order. Emergency services were called, and minutes later, sirens pierced the quiet suburban street. Paramedics arrived swiftly, carrying stretchers and medical kits as they pushed through the wreckage of what had once been a cheerful gathering. Jenna was lifted carefully, her arms wrapped in gauze, while Mark was steadied by two responders who helped him to the stretcher. Both were rushed into ambulances, their friends following behind in cars, still shaken from the sudden attack. Authorities arrived soon after, securing the property and inspecting the trail where the animal had returned to the woods. Wildlife officers noted the claw marks etched into the deck, the broken cooler lids, and the scattered scraps of food. It was clear that strong scents and the easy access to garbage and cooked meals had drawn the bear. Officers explained that this type of encounter had become more common as bears searched for quick sources of food in areas close to people. The neighborhood remained restless throughout the night. Parents refused to let their children out of their homes, and many sat awake, replaying the sounds of the attack in their minds. For Jenna and Mark's family, the hospital became their refuge as doctors worked to close the gashes with dozens of stitches. Jenna's arms and shoulders were patched carefully, though the scars would remain for life. Mark's leg was cleaned, stitched, and wrapped, the deep slash leaving him unable to walk without crutches for weeks. In the days that followed, the story spread quickly. News outlets reported the details, showing images of the torn yard, the overturned grill, and the blood-stained grass. The once quiet suburban street became a focal point for wildlife experts, who warned about the dangers of leaving food unsecured. Neighbors who had gathered at the barbecue struggled to shake off the memory of claws flashing in the firelight and the screams that had cut through the evening air. Officials took action, setting traps and tracking the animal suspected to be behind the attack. Patrols monitored the area, and residents were advised to remove garbage, secure outdoor cooking areas, and remain vigilant. For many, the carefree feeling of outdoor gatherings was replaced by caution, their sense of safety permanently altered. The Collins family returned home weeks later, their wounds healing, but their trust in the peaceful backyard broken. The simple memory of a summer evening had transformed into a painful reminder of how quickly nature could invade their world. Although both Jenna and Mark survived, their lives were forever changed, and the neighborhood learned a lasting lesson about living near wild forests. On September 15, 2022, the frozen air around a lonely Arctic research station carried only the sound of wind rushing across the snow. The white expanse stretched endlessly, broken only by a few low buildings, supply sheds and storage crates piled in rows. Among the small crew working there was Lars Anderson, 34, who had spent months in the unforgiving cold collecting data, hauling equipment, and helping keep the station running smoothly. Strong and disciplined, he had grown used to the silence of the tundra, but he always knew danger could appear without warning. That morning, the group was busy moving crates stacked with gear and food across the icy yard. Frost clung to their jackets, and boots crunched over the frozen ground as they worked. Lars carried several containers toward a supply shed, his focus fixed on balancing the load against the biting wind. None of the team expected the predator that lurked at the edge of the barren plain. From the endless whiteness, a massive polar bear emerged, its breath steaming against the sharp cold. It had followed the faint scent of supplies, drawn closer with each step until the station lay within striking distance. Without hesitation, the huge animal broke into a run, snow exploding under its weight as it barreled forward. The roar came too late for Lars to react. The force of the impact sent him sprawling, supplies crashing down and scattering across the ground. Claws ripped through the thick fabric of his coat, tearing into his back and shoulder. Pain shot through his body as he struggled to crawl away, but falling crates pinned his legs, leaving him trapped under the predator's looming figure. The bear swiped again, its massive paws raking across the frozen wood and sending splinters flying. Colleagues nearby screamed in panic. They grabbed whatever they could, wrenches, shovels, even heavy backpacks, and hurled them at the animal. Tools clanged against the ice as the group shouted, desperate to draw its attention. For a tense moment, the polar bear continued to slash at the spot where Lars lay, its immense weight crushing the snow beneath it. Then, one of the flying objects struck close to its head, startling it just enough to turn. With a low growl, the animal swung its massive body around and back toward the open tundra, the sound of shouting echoing across the frozen yard. Bloodied and shaking, Lars used every ounce of strength to drag himself behind a storage container. His breath came fast in the freezing air, leaving clouds of steam as he pressed his injured shoulder against the icy metal. The predator lingered on the edge of the yard for several long seconds, its black eyes fixed on the humans, before retreating into the endless white. His colleagues rushed to his side, their gloves quickly stained red as they tried to stop the bleeding. The quiet station had become a scene of fear and chaos, marked by claw marks carved into crates, scattered supplies, and the deep wounds of one man who had come face to face with the unmatched force of the Arctic's most feared predator. The air around the Arctic station grew still again after the polar bear vanished into the white horizon, but the silence felt heavy and unnatural. The crew gathered around Lars, who lay propped against the side of the storage container, his breath coming in ragged, uneven gasps. The thick parka he had worn was shredded across the back, the fabric stiff with blood that had soaked through to his base layers. Deep claw wounds marked his shoulder and back, and every small movement sent waves of pain across his body. His face was pale against the biting wind, yet his eyes stayed open as the team tried to keep him conscious. One colleague ran toward the communications hut to signal for emergency help, while the others tore strips of fabric from spare jackets and pressed them firmly against the torn flesh. The icy air made the wounds sting, and frost began to cling to the blood that seeped through the makeshift bandages. Minutes felt like hours as they waited, every sound of cracking ice or distant howl making them fear the bear's possible return. The claw marks carved into the wood of the toppled crates stood as grim reminders of how close the predator had come to killing him. At last, the faint thrum of helicopter blades echoed through the frigid air. A rescue team arrived quickly, moving Lars onto a stretcher while checking his injuries. He was loaded into the aircraft as snow whipped up in the rotor wash, the bright red helicopter vanishing into the pale sky toward Longyearbyen. His colleagues stood together in the yard, exhausted and shaken, staring at the blood-stained snow where the attack had taken place. In the hospital, doctors worked for hours to repair the damage. Dozens of stitches closed the long gashes along his back, while his fractured shoulder was set and secured with bandages and braces. Lars remained under careful watch as the medical team monitored for infection and blood loss. Though his body would heal, it was clear that the memory of the polar bear's charge would remain long after the scars faded. News of the attack spread quickly across the Arctic research community. Photos of the damaged crates, blood-streaked snow, and claw-marked storage shed were shared as warnings of the dangers faced even in controlled research zones. Wildlife authorities reminded crews that the shrinking sea ice was driving polar bears inland more frequently, bringing them into closer contact with humans. Scented supplies, unsecured food, or even the simple smell of activity could draw a hungry predator straight to a camp. Back at the station, routine returned, but the attack's shadow remained. Fences were reinforced, alarms installed, and strict rules enforced. Crew carried flares and rifles everywhere, wary of the tundra's silence. For Lars, recovery meant weeks of therapy and restricted movement, haunted by claws ripping his coat and the predator's crushing weight. The attack became a grim reminder for all researchers. In the Arctic, the land belonged to the polar bear, and survival required constant vigilance.